By the time The Ring was completed in 1874, Wagner was recognized in the musical world as the most important and influential composer in Europe.
But Wagner didn't stop at musical revolution. His mission was to create something equal to Greek tragedy combined with Shakespearean drama, which also had a political dimension. He felt it was his job to give the German people a heroic past and an even more heroic destiny. He actually believed his operas might change the face of Europe.
As Wagner was writing The Ring, Germany was beginning the process of unifying into one modern state, and it was developing into a major power.
The 1870s saw Germany's first ever flush of self-confidence, having just thrashed the French 1-0 in the first round of the Champions League that was the Franco-Prussian War.
Wagner's Ring cycle was part of a whole movement of romantic nationalism. Ancient heroes were being dusted down and offered a starring role in their native epics.
All over Europe, composers were urging their compatriots to rediscover their glorious but distant national heritage.
At its simplest, this national music celebrated the landscape and beauty of the homeland. The Czech composer Bedřich Smetana's My Country was completed like The Ring in 1874. Composers like Edvard Grieg in Norway and Gustav Mahler in Austria also found inspiration in Wagner's rich, romantic sound pictures. But Wagner's influence wasn't entirely benign.
The impact Wagner had was enormous, but it was by no means confined just to other composers. By far the most disturbing influence Wagner had was on Adolf Hitler and the whole ideology of Nazism. Hitler himself said, "Whoever wants to understand National Socialist Germany must know Wagner." Here on this site in Nuremberg, the Nazis held their huge party rallies and quasi-religious state ceremonies. The soundtrack was massively amplified Wagner, the staged ritual and the massed choreography Wagnerian too. Here, the cult of Wagner reached its terrifying apogee. Where had it all begun?
Wagner's celebration of Germanic heroes like Siegfried and Tannhäuser had an ugly racist undercurrent that was to have a powerful and predictable effect on the Nazis.
Wagner became obsessed with the concept of Aryan superiority over other so-called degenerate races and spent most of his adult life writing violently anti-Semitic articles. His hatred of the Jews wasn't confined to books and journalism either, since many of his operatic villains are crude anti-Semitic caricatures too. There are many lovers of Wagner's music who'd like to airbrush this side of his legacy out of the picture, but it's dishonest not to see Wagner the man for what he was, a revolting, bigoted, racist megalomaniac. It was his vision of a German future that Hitler seized upon. It was in his writings and his operas that Nazi propagandists found the pseudo-intellectual claptrap to underpin their crude thuggery. Wagner was much more than history's innocent pawn. He was, in fact, one of the progenitors of the Nazi nightmare. It's often argued in defense of Wagner that he was not alone in his anti-Semitism, that it was a common characteristic of his age. Yes, unfortunately it's true that many men and women of his generation were anti-Semitic. But there's something excessive about the violence of his views that alarmed even his colleagues and associates. He suggested, for example, in his 1859 article, The Jews in Music, that the Jews' best contribution to the glorious future of Europe would be to annihilate themselves. He concludes by calling on the Jews to redeem themselves from their curse through burning themselves alive. His vision was of a bold, pure German Reich, empty of Jews altogether. He describes this as the great solution that only the Germans could dare to achieve.
No wonder that Wagner was worshipped by Hitler. In the 1930s, Bayreuth became a sacred temple of Nazism. Hitler was a frequent and honoured guest and came close to marrying Wagner's widowed daughter-in-law, Winifred. Her children called him Uncle Wolf. To this day, Wagner's reputation remains sullied by his own racism and by the way the Nazis glorified it.
And so we're left with the dilemma of Richard Wagner, who's lying here in the grounds of his home, Wahnfried. He was undoubtedly a musical genius, but can his music be separated from the poison that spewed from his venomous pen and that one way or another infected his operatic works? This is one of music history's most awkward questions. Supporters of Wagner say he died long before the Nazis emerged under Hitler. 40 years, in fact. And maybe Wagner would have been appalled had he lived to see Hitler take him at his word. Maybe.
Many people, of course, love Wagner's music while still loathing his politics. Many Jewish musicians play Wagner to this day. Personally, I find it hard to admire Wagner's work without a degree of unease. Composers operate in the real world, not a fantasy Valhalla or a Nintendo virtual universe where real people don't suffer real injury. And I wonder whether the supporters of Wagner's legacy would defend offensive, misogynistic or racist rap, say, with as much vehemence as they do Wagner. There is, without doubt, great power and great passion in his work. Its ambition and its musical importance cannot be denied.
The French composer Claude Debussy, who acknowledged Wagner's overwhelming importance to all those who followed in his wake, had this to say about his legacy. All that remains will be beautiful ruins, in whose shadow our grandchildren will dream of the former greatness of this man who was underendowed only in humanity to be truly great.
Stay with 4 for the World Cup snowboard next.